Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your life is not entirely yours, that the decisions you thought you made freely were quietly sculpted by something deeper, invisible hand guiding you back, again and again, to the same mistakes you swore you would never repeat. You recognize the pattern, the same kind of failed relationship, the same reckless decision with money, the same betrayal of your own intentions. And yet, despite the tears, the promises, the self-lectures in the mirror, you return, almost helplessly, to the cycle. Why? Why would a rational being, equipped with memory, logic, and experience, deliberately walk back into the fire after being burned? Why would you sabotage your own future with choices that carry the bitter aftertaste of déjà vu? Is it weakness? Is it ignorance? Or is there something far more unsettling at play, something woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human? You tell yourself, this time will be different. But how many times have you whispered that same line before diving headfirst into the familiar abyss? It's almost comical, if it weren't so tragic, the way you can foresee the outcome, anticipate the regret, and still be unable to resist the pull. Could it be that the mistake is not in the choice itself, but in the invisible script you are following? Think of it. Every mistake has a flavor, a texture, a rhythm, and yours tend to repeat like a haunting melody that won't stop playing. It's as though life has set you on an endless loop, where lessons are offered but never learned, where punishment is endured but never transformed into wisdom. And what if this loop is not accidental? What if it is the very condition of existence, that human beings are designed not to escape mistakes, but to circle them endlessly until some hidden realization awakens within? Consider this paradox. We claim to grow wiser with age, yet the older we get, the more we recognize the eerie persistence of our flaws. Time sharpens memory, but memory does not prevent repetition. You can recall every heartbreak in exquisite detail, every humiliation, every shattered promise, yet in the quiet moments of weakness, when desire whispers, when fear corners you, when loneliness presses against your chest, you act as though you have forgotten. So the question emerges, do you really forget? Or do you secretly crave the mistake? Maybe the mistake is not an error at all, but a disguised need. Perhaps you repeat what harms you because, beneath the surface, some deeper part of your psyche is begging for resolution. You replay the scene because it feels unfinished, like a film stuck on rewind until the story inside you finds closure. But what if closure never comes? What if you are condemned to replay the same failures, not because you are weak, but because you are searching for something you cannot name? This is the haunting truth. Repeating mistakes may not be about ignorance at all, it may be about identity. Who are you without your patterns? Who are you without the scars that define your narrative? Sometimes, repeating mistakes is less about seeking change and more about clinging to familiarity. The pain may hurt, but at least it feels like yours. Imagine that the very suffering you despise could also be the only thing that anchors you. The one thread that convinces you your life is real, that you are still you. If that is true, then perhaps you never truly wanted to escape your mistakes. Perhaps you only wanted them to hurt less. And so you hover in this twilight, not free, not entirely enslaved, circling the same broken patterns like a moth returning to the flame. The irony, you see the flame, you know the burn, yet you return anyway, because some secret part of you believes that the fire is not merely destruction, it is revelation. But here is the great question. If you are doomed to repeat your mistakes until you uncover their hidden meaning, then what exactly is it you are supposed to learn? And if you cannot learn it, if you resist it, if you bury it beneath excuses and distractions, then how many more years of your life will be sacrificed to the loop? The stage is set. You stand at the edge of a truth so unsettling that it threatens the very way you think about choice, freedom, and responsibility. Perhaps the mistake is not an obstacle, it is a mirror. Perhaps the loop is not punishment, it is the only language your soul understands. But if that's true, then the next question becomes even heavier. What exactly is your soul trying to tell you? The hidden problem and its psychological, philosophical roots. Perhaps the answer lies not in the mistake itself, but in the shadow behind it, the invisible architecture of your mind, the ancient patterns buried beneath the surface of consciousness. Because here's the unsettling truth. You are not oneself, but many. Beneath the polished mask you show the world, there is a restless crowd of impulses, fears, memories, and unmet desires that quietly dictate your choices. Carl Jung once called this the shadow, the parts of yourself you do not wish to see, the rejected fragments of identity that you bury because they are too painful, too shameful, too dangerous to confront. But the shadow does not stay buried. It leaks through the cracks, whispering through temptation, through anger, through longing, and often it whispers in the form of repetition. The mistakes you make again and again may not be failures of logic, but eruptions of the shadow demanding to be seen. Think about it. How often have you sworn you would never again fall for the wrong person, only to find yourself drawn to them with a magnetism you cannot explain? You know better, yet something deep within you aches to repeat the story. Jung would argue that this is not stupidity, it's fate. Until you make the unconscious conscious, you are doomed to let it rule your life. But the shadow is not the only architect here. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of another trap, the eternal return. He asked, what if every action you took had to be repeated for eternity, exactly as it is, forever and ever? The very thought is horrifying, but perhaps this is already your reality in miniature. Each time you stumble back into the same mistake, you are living your own eternal returner, looping affirmation that reveals how little you have transformed. The question, then, is not just why you repeat, but whether you have the courage to break the cycle at all. Arthur Schopenhauer went even further, suggesting that life itself is bound to the will of blind. Irrational force inside every creature that drives desire without concern for reason or happiness. You think you choose freely, but in truth, you are often just an instrument of this insatiable will. That craving for the familiar pain, the reckless leap back into patterns you swore to abandon, it is the will at work, feeding itself through your suffering. You may hate the repetition, but a part of you is addicted to it because it keeps the will alive. And what about Sartre? He would argue that you were trapped in bad faith, a kind of self-deception where you pretend to be powerless, pretend you couldn't help it because admitting your freedom would be too terrifying. To accept freedom means to accept responsibility for your choices, and with it, the unbearable weight of guilt for having chosen wrong. It is easier to hide in the illusion of inevitability. I just can't change. That's how I am. Thus you repeat, because the repetition gives you an alibi against the truth of your own freedom. But this is not merely philosophy, it's psychology as well. Modern research on cognitive biases shows how deeply flawed our decision-making really is. You are not a rational creature, carefully analyzing every step. You are a bundle of shortcuts, heuristics, and emotional echoes. The availability heuristic, for instance, tricks you into believing what is familiar is safer, even if it has burned you before. Confirmation bias leads you to filter the world through your pre-existing beliefs, so that every red flag looks strangely comforting. Every warning seems exaggerated. And then there is trauma. Neuroscience has revealed that the brain, when wounded by past pain, often seeks to recreate the conditions of that pain, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it is trying to rewrite the story. A child neglected by a parent may unconsciously seek neglect in their relationships as an adult, hoping, against all logic, that this time the ending will be different. Of course, it rarely is. The wound repeats itself, carving deeper scars, until the person realizes the truth. What they seek is not love, but resolution. So you see, the hidden problem is not that you are careless, not that you are incapable of learning, but that you are haunted by forces far older and stronger than your rational mind. The repetition of mistakes is not a failure of intelligence, it is a conflict between the unconscious, the will, and the fragile illusions of freedom you construct to shield yourself from terror. And yet, is that the whole truth? Think of the society you live in. It whispers constantly in your ear, "Buy this, desire that, follow this path, avoid that risk." You grow up immersed in cultural narratives that normalize repetition. Capitalism thrives on it, the endless cycles of consumption, pleasure, guilt, and consumption again. Religion often thrives on it, the same rituals, the same sins confessed week after week, the same desperate promise to change. Even politics thrives on it, the same conflicts recycled, the same promises unfulfilled. So perhaps your mistakes are not merely personal, they are woven into the fabric of collective existence. You are repeating not only your own unconscious wounds, but also the wounds of civilization itself. And yet, what is the cost of living this way? What happens to a person or to a society that cannot escape the gravity of its own patterns? Do we collapse into cynicism, believing that nothing can change? Do we numb ourselves with distraction, hoping the cycle will hurt less if we refuse to see it? Or do we finally face the truth that repetition is not punishment, but a message, but also the wounds of civilization itself? And yet, what is the cost of living this way? What happens to a person or to a society that cannot escape the gravity of its own patterns? Do we collapse into cynicism, believing that nothing can change? Do we numb ourselves with distraction, hoping the cycle will hurt less if we refuse to see it? Or do we finally face the truth that repetition is not punishment, but a message? The weight of that question lingers, pressing against your chest. You can feel it now, the shadow pulling, the will demanding, the biases distorting, the culture looping. All of it conspires to keep you bound. And perhaps the cruelest part is this: the more you struggle against it without understanding, the tighter the noose becomes. But still, there must be a way out. There must be a key hidden inside the loop itself. The problem is not that you repeat, but that you do not yet know why. And until you uncover the cost of not knowing until you see the unseen consequences, you will remain exactly where you are. The unseen consequences. Every cycle has a price. Every repetition leaves a residue. And though you may tell yourself, it's just one more time, the truth is far harsher. Each time you repeat the same mistake, you etch it deeper into your identity. Patterns are not passive, they carve grooves into the brain, habits into the soul, destinies into your future. You think the mistake is temporary. You believe the damage is recoverable. But the real cost is silent, cumulative, and invisible. You may not notice it immediately, but repetition corrodes something sacred within you, your capacity to believe in change. The first time you fall into the wrong relationship, you are hurt but hopeful. The second time, you shake your head, frustrated but forgiving. The third, the fifth something in you begins to collapse. A whisper grows louder. Maybe this is just who I am. Maybe this is all I deserve. And so, the unseen consequence is not just penance, is resignation. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, a state where you stop fighting, stop hoping, stop believing that your actions can alter the outcome. Once a laboratory dog was shocked repeatedly with no way to escape. Eventually, even when the cage door was left open, the animal simply lay down and accepted the pain. How different are you when you repeat the same mistakes until you no longer try to resist? But this is only the beginning. Every repeated mistake leaves behind something else, a subtle distortion of memory. Neuroscience has shown that memory is not a record, it is a reconstruction. Each time you recall an event, you rewrite it. And when you keep making the same mistake, you begin to rewire the story itself. That toxic relationship you swore you would never revisit starts to look not so bad in hindsight. That reckless financial gamble seems less catastrophic when viewed from a distance. The repetition doesn't just scar you, it deceives you, bending your own history to justify the cycle. And what happens when your own mind becomes an accomplice in your downfall? You stop trusting yourself. You stop believing your own promises. You look into the mirror and hear the quiet, mocking echo. You'll say you'll change, but you won't. And that erosion of self-trust is one of the most devastating, unseen consequences of all. Because how can you live fully, boldly, if you secretly suspect that you are your own enemy? But the damage extends beyond the self. Repetition shapes relationships, societies, entire generations. Families, for instance, often pass down the same mistakes like heirlooms. A parent wounded by abandonment unconsciously abandons their own child, not always physically, but emotionally, spiritually. That child, aching for love, seeks the same abandonment in their adult life. The cycle repeats, not because anyone wants it, but because no one understands it. Trauma is inherited not just through stories, but through silence, through behaviors, through invisible scripts written long before you were born. Zoom out further, and you see the same haunting rhythm at the level of culture. Nations repeat wars under different names, repeating the same promises of peace, the same rhetoric of justice, the same betrayals. Economies repeat boom and bust cycles, driven by greed that no amount of history ever seems to cure. Politicians repeat the same empty words, and voters, weary but forgetful, return to the same choices. Humanity itself is caught in a larger loop, staggering forward while dragging the weight of its unlearned lessons. And yet, perhaps the most dangerous consequence is not what you do, but what you don't do. Every repeated mistake is time stolen from what could have been. Imagine the years lost to cycles of avoidance, distraction, indulgence, regret. Imagine the potential strangled by fear of breaking the pattern. You may survive the pain of repetition, but you will never know the life that might have unfolded had you broken free earlier. That is the cruelest loss, the unlived life. And what about happiness? Real happiness demands trust in your choices, trust in your future, trust in your capacity to grow. But when you repeat mistakes, happiness becomes fragile, temporary, fleeting. You may laugh, you may smile, but in the quiet moments, doubt creeps in. How long before I ruin this too? And so even joy is poisoned by the shadow of the loop. But the unseen consequences go deeper still, into the realm of identity. Every mistake you repeat whispers something about who you are, and eventually you start to believe it. I am the kind of person who always fails. I am the kind of person who always chooses wrong. It becomes not just an action, but a self-definition. And when your very identity fuses with your mistakes, how do you even begin to imagine freedom? This is the danger. Mistakes repeated long enough no longer feel like mistakes. They feel like fate. And if that is true, then what happens to a human being when they confuse their prison for their destiny? Perhaps that is the darkest consequence of all. Not the pain itself, not the lost opportunities, not even the erosion of trust, but the quiet surrender to the belief that the cycle is unbreakable, that you are condemned to live out the same story until your final breath. But must it be this way? Must we accept repetition as destiny? Or is there, hidden within the very cycle itself, the seed of rebellion, the possibility of awakening, the chance to finally say no more? The weight of these consequences cannot be ignored. To repeat is human, but to awaken, to rebel against the loop, may be the only path to something greater. And so, the question sharpens. If the unseen consequences are this devastating, then how do you break free? The rebellion, how to break free. Every cycle carries within it a hidden invitation, the possibility to break it. But rebellion against repetition is not easy, nor is it obvious. You cannot simply decide, I will never make this mistake again, because you have already tried that. You have whispered those words in the dark, after heartbreak, after loss, after shame, and still, the loop pulled you back. So how do you escape a prison whose walls are invisible? The first step is paradoxical. You stop running from the mistake. You face it. For as long as you see your mistakes as enemies to be banished, they will stalk you from the shadows. But when you stand still, when you turn and stare directly into the pattern, you begin to see it not as punishment but as teacher. The cycle repeats because something in you refuses to listen. The rebellion begins with listening. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." To break the cycle, you must drag the unconscious into the light. That means asking yourself questions so uncomfortable that they shake your very identity. Why do I crave what hurts me? What unspoken need am I trying to fill? Whose approval am I still chasing? Whose voice is still echoing in my decisions? But self-inquiry alone is not enough. You must also dare to sit with the pain you are always trying to escape. Repetition often comes from avoidance. The avoidance of emptiness, of loneliness, of grief. You run back to the familiar mistake because it numbs you from feeling the deeper wound. So the rebellion requires that you sit in the silence. Let the loneliness press against your chest. Let the grief flow without distraction. Only by facing the wound can you stop using mistakes as bandages. This act of courage is radical because it goes against the grain of society itself. The world trains you to escape discomfort instantly through consumption, through entertainment, through the dopamine drip of endless scrolling. To pause, to feel, to refuse distraction is an act of rebellion against an entire culture of avoidance. And yet, only in that pause do you discover the space where transformation becomes possible. History, too, offers examples of this rebellion. Consider Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, not by denying suffering, but by finding meaning within it. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Breaking free from repetition requires that same stance, not the denial of pain, but the recreation of its meaning. If your repeated mistakes are a message, then what if you are free the moment you decode it? But decoding is not merely intellectual, it is embodied. Neuroscience shows that habits are grooves in the brain, strengthened by every repetition. You cannot erase them by thought alone. You must carve new grooves through action. The rebellion, then, is not only saying I will change, but living differently in small, radical ways. If you always seek the same toxic partner, you must practice choosing solitude until solitude no longer feels like death. If you always sabotage opportunities, you must practice success in microdoses, staking small risks, allowing small victories until the taste of growth becomes less terrifying than the taste of failure. And yet, the rebellion also demands something counterintuitive: forgiveness. You cannot break free if you despise yourself for falling. Shame feeds the loop, convincing you that you are unworthy of change. Forgiveness interrupts that lie. To forgive yourself is to reclaim your power to try again without the weight of self-contempt. Nietzsche, too, offers a radical weapon: the concept of amor fati, the love of fate. He urges us not merely to endure life's repetitions, but to embrace them, to say yes even to the mistakes. Why? Because in loving your fate, you strip it of its power to control you. Imagine saying, yes, I made this mistake. Yes, I may make it again. And yet, I love the fact that it has shaped me, carved me, taught me. Suddenly, the mistake is no longer a prison, it is a path. But rebellion cannot stop at the individual. If repetition is embedded in culture, then breaking free requires collective courage. It means questioning the narratives society feeds you, that more consumption equals more happiness, that familiar pain is safer than unknown growth, that cycles of violence or exploitation are inevitable. True rebellion is contagious. It spreads from the personal to the communal. When you break your own loop, you weaken the chains of the larger human loop. And yet, there is a deeper rebellion still: the refusal to identify with the mistake at all. For years, perhaps decades, you have whispered to yourself, "This is just who I am." But what if it isn't? What if identity itself is a prison made of recycled stories? Sartre would argue that existence precedes essence, that you are not a fixed being, but a creator, free to redefine yourself at any moment. To rebel is to refuse to let your past decide your essence. The rebellion, then, is not a single act. It is a lifelong stance. To confront the shadow instead of fleeing. To embrace solitude instead of clinging to toxic comfort. To carve new grooves instead of surrendering to old ones. To forgive instead of despise. To love fate instead of fearing it. And to redefine yourself instead of worshipping the ghost of who you used to be. But this rebellion is not for the faint of heart. To break the loop is to stand at the edge of the unknown. It is to abandon the strange comfort of familiar pain and step into a freedom so vast it feels terrifying. And yet, is this not what you have been yearning for all along? So the final question lingers. If you dare to rebel against repetition, what new truth awaits on the other side? The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. What if the greatest mistake of all is believing that mistakes are something to escape? You have spent years running from the cycles, from the shadows, from the wounds that echo like a broken record. You thought freedom meant never repeating, never failing, never slipping again. But what if that belief itself is the final trap? Because here is the truth that shatters the illusion. You are not meant to be flawless. You are meant to be unfinished. Every repetition, every stumble, every loop you curse as a failure is in fact the raw material of your becoming. Without repetition, there is no pattern. Without pattern, there is no recognition. Without recognition, there is no awakening. The mistake was never the enemy, was the compass. and it has been pointing, always, toward the hidden terrain of your soul. Imagine looking back at your life not with regret, but with reverence. Imagine seeing each repeated mistake not as wasted years, but as inscriptions in the great book of your becoming. That toxic love you fell into again and again. It was teaching you the cost of abandoning yourself. That financial recklessness, it was forcing you to face your fear of stability. That silence in the face of injustice, it was revealing your hunger for courage. Every mistake repeats until its wisdom is absorbed. This is the law of the psyche, as precise. As gravity, the universe does not punish you with cycles, educates you through them. And so the final realization is this: you are not a victim of repetition. You are its student. Look at the river. It repeats the same journey every day, flowing over the same stones, the same bends, the same currents. Yet it is not imprisoned by repetition. It deepens with each pass, carving canyons, nourishing valleys, shaping landscapes. The repetition is not stagnation, it is transformation. Could your mistakes be the same? Each return carving depth into you, sculpting you into a vessel capable of holding wisdom you could not yet bear. What you call failure is often the soul's training ground. What you call wasted time is the slow chiseling of character. What you call shame is the shadow of a deeper strength, waiting to be revealed. Nietzsche's eternal return, once a nightmare, now becomes a challenge. If you had to live this same life, these same mistakes, over and over for eternity, could you learn to say yes to it all? Could you love your fate so fully that even your scars become sacred? To reach this point is to realize something breathtaking. The loop is not a prison, it is a spiral. You are not going in circles. You are ascending, even when it feels like you are standing still. Each repetition brings you back to the same place, yes, but at a higher level of awareness, a deeper understanding. The scenery looks familiar, but you are not the same traveler. And in that moment, the fear dissolves. The repetition no longer mocks you. It becomes your ally, your mirror, your guide. So what is the ultimate truth? That freedom is not the absence of mistakes. Freedom is the embrace of them, the ability to walk into the loop with open eyes, to feel the weight of the pattern without succumbing to despair, to extract the lesson without drowning in shame. True freedom is not to never fall, is to fall differently, to fall consciously, to rise each time with a new depth of vision. And perhaps the most radical realization of all, you were never trapped to begin with. The cage you feared was made of your own resistance. The loop was not locking you in. It was waiting for you to see it. This is why some people, even after a lifetime of repetition, suddenly awaken in a single instant. They realize the loop was the teacher all along. And in that instant, the cycle does not vanish, it transforms. It no longer drags them unconsciously, they walk it consciously, shaping meaning from its rhythm. Think of Viktor Frankl, who emerged from the horrors of the concentration camp not shattered, but illuminated by the truth that man's last freedom is to choose meaning. Think of the countless mystics who spoke of life as a wheel, endless turning, endless return, and yet found liberation not in escaping the wheel, but in awakening within it. The ultimate truth, then, is not escape, it is transcendence. Your mistakes will not stop. Life will not suddenly smooth itself into perfection, but you will no longer experience them as chains. You will see them as steps, each one carrying you deeper into the mystery of yourself. So ask yourself now, can you look at your most painful repetition and say, thank you? Can you look at the scars and whisper, this too was necessary? Can you take the story you once cursed and weave it into the fabric of your wisdom? If you can, then the loop has already served its purpose. And when the next mistake comes and you will not greet it with despair. You will greet it with curiosity. You will ask, what lesson hides here? What part of myself is calling to be known? This is the great paradox. The moment you stop fearing the repetition is the moment you are no longer bound by it. So imagine waking up tomorrow with this truth alive in you, that nothing in your life has been wasted, that every mistake, every loop, every heartbreak was the very material of your becoming. Imagine walking into your day no longer terrified of repeating the past, but awake to the possibility that even if you do, it will shape you, it will sculpt you, it will guide you closer to yourself. The spiral continues, the river flows, the wheel turns, and use card unfinished. Luminous step into it, not as a prisoner, but as a creator. That is the ultimate truth. Not freedom from mistakes, but freedom through them. And the final, most powerful realization, you are not doomed to repeat. You are destined to awaken.